Hi, this is Greg Smythe, and I want to welcome you to this week's episode of Uncharted Waters, the podcast brought to you by Global NL. The goal of the podcast is to share stories of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians doing interesting and amazing things, both at home in the province and around the world. This week's interview is with Josh Davis, a good friend who I both studied and worked with for many years. He graduated from Memorial University's engineering program in 2009 and is currently working and living with his family in Houston, Texas. During the interview, we discuss both pros and cons of living outside the province, how to effectively manage work-life balance, and explore the idea of how your career is a jungle gym and not a ladder. We hope you enjoy the episode and look forward to sharing more stories like this in the near future. All right, so welcome to this week's episode of the Global NL podcast, recently rebranded to Uncharted Waters, where we try and share stories of Newfoundlanders doing interesting and amazing things around the world. So this week I've got Josh Davis here joining me, a good friend of mine from St. John's. We went through engineering school around the same time. I'll let him briefly introduce himself. This is going to be kind of an experimental episode where we talk about a bunch of topics we have interest in, and might be something we might periodically do. So I'll let Josh introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Hi, Greg. Yeah, Josh Davis. I'm from St. John's, a good proper townie. Went through Oil Engineering, did mechanical, graduated in 2009 and joined a major integrated oil company and worked there in Newfoundland for a long, long time and have since moved down to an assignment in Houston, Texas, sort of in the heart of the oil and gas industry. And also made a pretty significant career change going from an engineering role to an HR role. And I'm super excited to talk about some of the topics around this, expatriation, new assignments, change, and Mun Engineering too.
Yeah, so I figured we'd start there. Like I went through a similar experience moving from Newfoundland to Houston and have kind of since landed in California. But I'm just curious to know, like that first, although like we had spent a bunch of time like in Houston and visiting the US, like moving was just like a very different experience. I'm curious to know if like you had a similar experience, like moving there, meeting people, meeting new friends, like kind of what that experience was like and some of the maybe ups and downs of that change.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's like really daunting. Even the decision to even show interest in the assignment was very daunting. Moving your family, myself, my wife, my two kids, deep roots in Newfoundland. All of our families there, all our friends are there. We've been there our whole lives virtually, right? So it was a big task to even look at it. And then once it started happening, of course, it's very fast. And then I think, the actual move is, of course, stressful. We sold our home. We sold all of our vehicles. We packed up all our stuff and moved down to, culturally a very different place in many ways. And then geographically very different in Houston. And it's a big adjustment. We flew down and in 3 days we looked at houses and picked one to live in with your family. That just is so, versus shopping around in your hometown, it's very different. And when we got a place. And so at first it was very, very overwhelming, very daunting. We get down here, nothing's set up. You don't know who to call, electrical bills, gas, utilities, whatever it is. That whole prospect of moving to a new country and a new system is very daunting. But it took almost no time for us to just start seeing the positives. And it's not, the weather is a big part of it. I won't pull the punches, but we started to make friends. And it's as simple as that. It's like we started to want to make the kids make friends. And then we just started making friends with the parents. And all of a sudden our street, really, we just hit the jackpot. Our neighborhood is fantastic. And we've got a lot of good friends here. I really feel like we'll have friends for life, even if we left today. And to be honest, the work stuff, I could have predicted how the new job would be, new team, new people, new location. But the personal side was what's stressful. And as soon as we started to make some friends and kind of do some things outside of work, it just totally opened it up. And I have to say, like, we're loving it.
Yeah, it does take time. I remember, like, I think I told you we had the Friends initiative we joked about before, but it doesn't kind of naturally happen, or you end up only hanging out with people from work, which can be like okay, but meeting people outside of that or have family connections can be like kind of a healthy balance. The
Yeah,
yeah,
I think it depends where you are in your life too, right? Like,
yeah,
had we done this, around the time that you did it, with no children and we had a good social life at home, but it was mostly revolving around the kids at that time. Our kids are 2 and 4, and so it's not like had a two times a week going out with friends. It's mostly kind of afternoon events and spending time with the kids, and so we really, for 90% of our life in Newfoundland, we could have been anywhere in the world. Really, we're in our house in our backyard, right?
yeah,
So I don't think it's not that much sacrifice.
yeah. No, I know what you mean. The other thing I was going to touch on was like culturally, it is quite different. Like living in California now, it's kind of similar to Canada. Like culturally, it's kind of more kind of aligned with Canadian values and a few other things. But I mean, we met some really close friends that like came from very different backgrounds, whether it's like, religious backgrounds or, you know, guns and things like that, or people are much more comfortable with that was new to us and just like kind of conservative, much more conservative place. But I think it actually made me appreciate those people. Like we became very good friends with a ton of like wonderful people that had like very different views on like whether it's politics, religion, or guns. And it taught me a lot because like when we moved out here too, you also get this like we moved from Texas and they're like Californians have this very particular view about people from Texas, and like I just didn't have that personal experience with people. Maybe there is some like hardcore folks, but our experience was like overwhelmingly positive with like the friends we met there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not dissimilar to Newfoundland. I mean, you would characterize Newfoundland as a place where the door swings open when you walk up the street, whether you know the person or not, and everybody welcomes everyone in, and by and large that is the case, but it's not exclusively the case. And I know that folks that would come in and move to Newfoundland, the overwhelming majority would have a great experience and find that social niche. But there was always situations where you move into a neighborhood where there's some people that are less friendly or less welcoming, or even just less aligned with you. So I don't think it's so much about the big picture. What is Texas about? I really think, if you were to draw a circle of where you spend your time, like a heat map, it's pretty small, right? And really the question is, what are the people in that circle like? Are they at all like you, or can you at least find common ground? And I think, like, how could you not, right?
Yeah. Even like the other people often talk about like company culture and like why people leave and things like that. And they always like talk about these like very big picture things, but most of the time it's like the experience of like your first line manager largely drives like your entire experience in the company. And I think that's probably true. It's like the 5 closest friends you have, it like is the world that revolves around you. Yeah. I was going
Yeah,
to suggest switching gears a little bit. I mean, I think we both went through engineering school at Mun. I think we were going to talk about, I've had a lot of co-op experience. I think even since we worked together, like I've worked with, I mean, it feels like hundreds of co-op students now at this point. And like between like engineering students when I worked at home, and then in Texas, and then here we hire like, literally the company hires like hundreds of interns a semester. And it's just interesting to see like the different dynamics between students. I work with students from all the Ivy League universities and things like that, and then bringing memorial students in. In contrast, it's really interesting because I've seen some students perform like extremely well. But I'm curious what you want to. The other thing I don't know if I've shared with you, but I'm on the advisory board for the engineering school now, just like starting in January. And so I'm curious to get other people's perspective on what, you're kind of 10 years out of school. Like, what did you like about the program? Some of the drawbacks maybe, or what could change or things like that. I'm always curious to get perspective on that too.
sure. Yeah, I'll start well, let's start at the start with my experience, I guess. I think you'd be lying if you said that your initial takeaway from the Mun Engineering program was that it was a breathtaking campus with beautiful labs and complicated equipment. There's a few amazing things happening there, like eye-popping things, wave tanks and ice testing and America's Cup sailboats being tested under the cloak of secrecy. I mean, there's some cool stuff, and I don't want to diminish that. But at the same time, I went through some of those engineering labs and did the experiments that were, the same experiment being done for 20 years, it felt. And so I always felt early on, and even to some extent until I graduated, that I was getting that my education level was not up to par with an Ivy League school or a big American school or even a Waterloo or a big Canadian school. And all that I've seen has disproved that, because as I started work with this company in St. John's, I was started to become the coordinator for all the students coming through and doing some of the recruitment and interviewing, and then onboarding them and then giving them some work and kind of mentoring them and giving feedback to the coordinator. So I was that person for our company. It's amazing what Mun Engineering students can do. Even we bring in junior students who, their top of their resume would be like, working at a music store for 8 months. And so it's amazing what people can do. And I think that's a lot of Mun Engineering, but I think it's a lot of Newfoundland culture rubbing off as well. When I came down to this job, ironically, I'm in a role now as a global staffing development advisor. So my whole thing is staffing and career development. And I see I see those Ivy League schools and the big Southern schools coming through, and people with the 4.0 GPAs and valedictorian of this and volunteer at that, and really amazing resumes. I interview them; they're amazing. But I got to be honest, like right down to it, when it comes to putting wood on the wood pile, as we say, of doing work and doing quality work, I would put a Mun Engineering student, honest to God, up against anyone.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I think there is just like a core education that I think you receive, and sometimes I don't know if like a lot of the other things are kind of frills around it. I think the one thing I've talked multiple times on this podcast about, I just did with one with the head of the MCE. It's like the Memorial Center for Entrepreneurship this week. And he talked, a lot about trying to encourage entrepreneurship in the engineering program. And I think they work closely with the business school, which makes a lot of sense, right, to tie them close together. I think one thing I do think is missing, and that's gotten better since we left, is to find more paths, right? It was like, there was just like railroad tracks of a career when you came out of engineering school, and it was kind of, oil and gas or some sort of government job.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it, and I joke when I used to go up to the board in the co-op office, I was like, I thought that the jobs up there were every job in the world. That was all the jobs that existed. And you kind of have that naive kind of point of view on the world. And now you get to see how much opportunity is out there. It's incredible. And I think even trying to shift the co-op office's focus to, like, they used to be kind of this like job finding organization. And I've tried to coach them to, teach, as a teach a man how to fish, that quote, and teach a student how to find their own job, and they'll do fine, with LinkedIn and these new networks. They can go do whatever they want to do, and the co-op office doesn't need to kind of scour the world for these job opportunities. So, but I agree. I think having, I've seen so many exceptional like Memorial students come through, and I think what I'd like to see more of is just, it's not about leaving the province either, but that they have the opportunities they want, whatever that is. If they want to stay in Newfoundland and work for an energy company, then they should have that. But if they want to start a tech company, they should be able to do that. Or if they want to work in Silicon Valley, they should be able to do that. And I think as long as they know those options exist, and then I think, it's up to them what they put their mind to and do,
I know. I would tell students all the time, it's, if I was giving you advice, whether you want it or not, is, if I had 6 work terms to do, which I know that the number and the flexibility has changed, but if I had 6 work terms to do and I could do them over again, I would do 6 different work terms in 6 different places in 6 different industries with 6 different companies. And that's not impossible, right? That it's not. And it's just so, it becomes, securing the job becomes the focus versus getting the right experience. And you just end up kind of doing all these double ups. I did 3 pairs of work terms, right? And I really didn't diversify like I should have, or I
Yeah.
shouldn't. I don't regret it. I shouldn't say that. But if I was coaching someone, I would say it's as important to find out something you don't want to do as it is to find out something you do want to do.
Exactly. Because even like when I was in engineering school, I loved tech. I loved Apple. I was obsessed with Apple in engineering school. But like the thought of like working there or working in like Silicon Valley, like never even registered. It was like,
Yes.
I was trying to think of this analogy earlier. It would be like, starting a pizzeria on Mars or something like that. It just would be like that doesn't really exist. And I think part of what we're trying to do at Global NL is just to either share stories or just like, there's a quote out there that says like, you can't be what you can't see. And I think unless there's like someone that kind of looks like you or has like a similar background, that it does make it feel impossible, And I think the other thing about the tech companies we talk about is like Verafin kind of being this, like it's one of the most successful startups in Canada, and like, but proving that you can do that from Newfoundland is such a beacon for hope of these other smaller stage companies, and that can be true on an individual level of like someone who's high up in a tech company here or starts Verafin, like whatever it might be. I think it's having those stories out there is really important.
It totally is. It just it's not, it's gone beyond like the one-off rogue engineer. It always seemed like every class, there'd be one person like, wow, they really went and did that, It's amazing. And now it seems like it's getting a critical mass where, quite frankly, we'd recruit students at my employer in St. John's, and when they'd really come in, I mean, we used to be the belle of the ball, right? The oil and gas industry. And it became pretty clear that, when you get the really super high talent in there, that you were competing directly with tech industry for the first time. And I'm talking only in probably the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. And I think ultimately the more important thing I think is diversify the economy. I think I think we need to develop all the resources, whether it's like mining or like the hydro projects or oil and gas. Like we need to maximize resource development. But we need to diversify too. We've gone through these 2 oil crashes in the last 3 years, and just the government is so dependent on it, from an employment standpoint and a revenue standpoint. It just is, it really crushes the economy and a lot of things around it, and having employers like Verafin and these tech companies there to absorb some of that fluctuation, I think could be really, really good in the long term. Yeah.
I know, I'm with you. It feels like all the chips are in one corner for sure. And diversification is good. I struggle honestly, not as an advocate for the energy sector. I struggle to kind of see the path to real diversification as it is right now, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah. I do think like I do have like relationships with most of the early stage startups, and I think seeing Verafin, I don't know if they have like 1,000 employees, and they're valued over $1 billion now as a company and have huge revenue. But like I live like a couple of miles from the Facebook campus here, like one of the biggest companies in the world, and we don't need a Facebook like to make an impact. But if we had 2 or 3 more Verafins, like I do think it would have like a material impact on the economy, and it might not. It'll be hard for folks further in their career or that have hard skills that are tied directly to the energy sector, but for people coming out of school and like the next generation, there'll be additional branches of opportunity for them to step into. And it could generate a lot of wealth too. I'm sure the founders of Verafin have done very well financially, and we'll be able to either spend that money or reinvest that money in the province. And there is a flywheel effect of doing that.
Yeah, I think we need to separate, like from a Newfoundlander perspective, I think we need to separate like government budget balancing revenues from diversification of the economy, because 100 jobs in tech is not going to generate revenue like oil royalties, right? I mean, even a Verafin, $1 billion company, I'm not sure, I'm not educated enough to even estimate a guess, but the revenue stream to the government is likely just taxes and whatever spin-offs of the jobs and incomes of the employees, versus the oil industry. you're talking royalties on hundreds of millions of dollars of oil production and sales. So I think both are important, right? And I think we too often equate diversification and comparing the industries on the government's balance sheet, which I don't think we should. I think tech and jobs and energy and tech and jobs and the momentum it builds is as important as the revenue to the government.
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, I agree in some sense. I agree like that, say the tax base for Verafin is not going to backfill the oil revenue, right? That's clear. I have read like most of the recent like Newfoundland budgets, and I watched this talk by a guy, I can't remember, I don't know if it was Wade Locke or someone like that, and he, whoever it was, described it that we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And I think I don't want to get too political, but a lot of it is driven through increased spending, and that we did make a lot of additional revenue through like the Danny Williams period. But the spending just kind of kept pace with it. And then when oil prices crashed, it just, even like when they crashed 3 or 4 years ago, they cut all these programs and raised taxes, and like the spending only stayed flat, right? It didn't actually go down.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the challenge, that the government is like someone that's willing to like really trim the size of the government and the spending that it does is the challenging part. And there's a real rabbit hole we can go down here, but I think the other part of it is we're also behind in like infrastructure, a lot of services and things like that. And I think a lot of the spending that happened in that period probably was catching up on infrastructure that needed to be improved, right? Services or physical things. So it's like you can't blame the politicians for wanting to invest in those things, but it's like we also can't afford it. We're kind of living outside our means, or we temporarily could afford it, and that's the challenge, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I don't really, I don't recommend us going down the rabbit hole of what coulda, shoulda, or what we should in the future do. But as a Newfoundlander, it does weigh on me a little bit, the kind of state of affairs in the province.
Yeah, I was going to say that the next question I actually had was, what makes you optimistic about Newfoundland's future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because on one way, I talked about how, when you think about when I came down here, very quickly I learned that what affected me was not the macro stuff about Texas and the U.S. and the Southern U.S. and the politics, religion, gun control, whatever you want to talk about. What affected me was like the micro, or the really localized stuff, like who's my neighbor? How old are their kids? Is the grocery store nice? How far away is it? What's my house like? Do I have a big backyard? Is there someone behind me? The weather, those are the things that really make a difference for me in a short to medium term time frame, right? I don't, like in Newfoundland right now, like that doesn't feel that great. What I'm optimistic about is that in Newfoundland is the macro, the bigger pieces of it. And what I can relate to is like core values and the kind of culture that Newfoundland has, and it permeates all the people there and from there, and it sticks with you. I think you'd say you carry that around just like the flag over your shoulder with you, that instilled values from not just your family, but the province as well. So I think despite a kind of sad state of affairs in many ways, I think I'm optimistic that over the long term, the perseverance of people and the kind of culture and beauty of the place, it makes me optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope, I have a similar, like, you kind of want to separate the people from not people from the place, but I mean, I think the people will persevere, they've been through much more like hardship, either economically or for other reasons, like challenges in the past, and I think that won't change. And I think that's where maybe some of the humor in the province comes from, because like you can't take yourself too seriously, or you might go a little bit crazy, I think. And yeah, I do. It does make me optimistic. I think the thing, if I can share my perspective, I think it goes back to like I have gotten to work with like still a lot of Mun students have come through the company I work with here, and I see, and also like through other companies in Silicon Valley. like I'm still continuously impressed with like the quality, energy levels, and intelligence of those group of kids, I call them, but young adults and
Yeah.
stuff that are ready to start their career. And also like through this Hyperloop competition, like saw a lot of that enthusiasm, especially like competing on a global stage, that they can do that and do quite well. And I think that I've seen that give a lot of these students like confidence to go like, hey, I can start a company or be a CEO or to raise money from a Silicon Valley venture capitalist, like, and seeing that that confidence build. And then once there's like a critical mass of examples, people are like, oh, if that guy can do it, I can probably do it too. And those are like, I think Jeff Bezos has this quote that's like, every redwood starts as an acorn. And I do think there's a couple of acorns. There's 5 or 6 of those other individuals or companies that are out there that I think could be really big. And maybe they won't, but it makes me optimistic about there's a bunch of really smart young people working super hard to do some exciting things there, and that makes me optimistic.
Yeah, there's considerable momentum there. There are brilliant people with an energy level that you just can't contain, and it's awesome. That does make me optimistic. I just hope that everything that I know you and Global NL are doing a big amount of work to try and make sure that Newfoundland fosters that, right? Like, because that's the thing, is it is great. And I think like part of my message I'm sort of trying to convey is about taking the step and stepping outside your comfort zone in Newfoundland if that's what you want and you want to do some different in the near term. But we don't want it to be just a people production facility that just ships off great people to live elsewhere forever. And you want to be able to foster some of those things and build your Verafins and your collabs and foster that environment and then start expanding, right?
Yeah. I think even like I've heard stories recently of some of those companies like hiring people from Canada and and the US too, that have moved to Newfoundland to work at those companies. So it's an early indicator, but the fact that they're getting people to do that is also like a great thing, where all of a sudden you have like immigration to staff those companies. I think could be hopefully a positive thing. I think maybe, well, shifting gears a little bit, but I'm curious, we've talked a lot about, I guess, recent podcast episodes and things like that. I'm curious to know maybe first, like, how you think the podcast can help other Newfoundlanders living at home. Or, I mean, let me just describe something first. I mean, the way I've tried to describe Global NL is like this conduit that can help connect people in Newfoundland to expats living abroad, but like vice versa. So like people like you and I that are living away but still feel quite connected, for them to be able to give back to the province, or just stay connected or in touch with like kind of the things that are happening. I'm curious to know, like, maybe through the podcast, let's talk about the podcast first. Like, how do you think that can have a positive impact on either one of those communities? And then maybe we can talk more broadly about how you think we can help.
Yeah. So first, the podcast, I'm really enjoying it so far. I think the amazing thing that the podcast can do is it's just like a multiplier, right? You can reach so many more ears than you can on the phone or email to individuals. And so the nature of it being a broadcast is awesome. And so I think the main thing I get out of it, honestly, is like, I got to hear about Bethany Downer. I got to hear about Jill Langer. I get to hear about people, kind of Newfoundlanders doing amazing things. And then I also got to hear about people doing amazing things to foster that, right? Like you talk about the MCE lead at Mun. And so just hearing the stories, honestly, it just gets in your brain, and it's like anything. It's just repetition is key, and you just start to hear so many examples that you can't help but believe it, right? I mean, how am I, even abroad, for me personally, how am I going to hear the latest and greatest on what the comings and goings are in the tech industry in Newfoundland? But I got through a 40-minute, 50-minute podcast. I got to hear all about what MISA has been doing lately in their next phases and rollout, and how they're doing their manufacturing and supply chains. And, that's fascinating. And so if one person hears that who, has been on the fence, then that's it. That's worth doing the podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think The nice thing is it is quite scalable. Like I've done mostly remote episodes now. And so we can interview anybody anywhere. And then we can reach anyone anywhere, And so I think it's like a really scalable thing. Like we've done these like happy hours and stuff like that, but man, like the scope of who you can touch is really small,
Mm-hmm.
And I think with this, you can share like long form stories and to really get to know people and get different perspectives on things. I think that's what I love about podcasts. You can really get to know a subject, or an individual. And we're also trying to I know they're like quite long, so if people don't have time, we're trying to do like time-stamped outlines. So if you don't have time to listen to it, you can kind of skip to the topics that you're more interested in. But I agree. I think that the podcast part of it's most exciting to me. And one of the reasons I started it was because I was like kind of the front-facing thing for Global NL. People used to they still reach out to me on a regular basis to say like, hey, this is really interesting. Would love to talk to you about it. And I got to meet all these people like on private phone conversations. I'm like, man, this person is like so interesting. And I have a list of like 50 people to do on the podcast. I'm like so far behind.
Yeah,
but I want to have these like conversations in public and to share their stories, There's this guy I'm dying to meet. Like he's around our age, but he's like a famous movie, like music producer. And I think he's produced like all these huge artists in LA and stuff, but he's a really quiet, kind of shy guy. But I want to, get in touch with him and hopefully tell his story at some point. But I think that's what makes me so excited about it.
Yeah. To your other question about, Global NL going forward, I think it's funny because my job right now is, basically a global, this is very much a global company. My title is Staffing Development Advisor. So my actual mandate is to connect with everybody in our group all around the world, which is about 1,500 people, and talk to them one-on-one about career development, what's next for you, what are skills you need to build, what's an assignment that we could get you to kind of foster that. And it's exactly the kind of conversations that I think Global NL needs to have and are having. The interesting thing for me when I jumped into the role, right, engineering, analytical mind, I was like, okay, we need to build this network. We need to build build this kind of plumbing system that would connect people. And if you're asking about this, then here's who you email. Or by the way, here's the manual. You don't even need to call them. And I actually, this was my first foray into an HR position, right? And our manager took us aside. There's a bunch of us for all these different groups around the world. We look after about 18,000 people. And he said, listen, I know this sounds crazy, but the way to do this is 30-minute one-on-one conversations in person or on the phone. Because you look at it, you're like 1,500 people. I can't talk to 1,500 people. But he said, it doesn't matter. If you get 600, you get 600. And talking to people will totally move the needle more than a really slick website or like an auto texting system or like a job posting or interest skill building algorithm. It's until you actually talk to someone and they're able to ask questions and you're able to ask questions and you go back and forth. And we have had such success with that it's really turned me around to think like the same thing for Global NL, right? If you look at that population of Newfoundland or young Newfoundlanders even looking for work or careers and the expat community out of Newfoundland, I mean, that's a bigger number than 1,500. And you think of it like, oh, let's make the website slick and all that's super important too. But ultimately, it is the one-on-one connections. It's someone calling you and asking you your perspective and you sharing yours. And then they're like, wow, that's really interesting. Podcast allows you to then kind of air that so that, it was Susie and Greg, but 80% of that applied to me and now I feel good. So I really think it is about one-on-one conversations.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually really helpful because I also am like very tempted to like try and automate and process, systematize things as much as possible. But I think, yeah, like you said, like the podcast is a way for someone just to be a fly on the wall for a conversation. Yeah. And hopefully I can get better at asking the questions that, it's not necessarily young people, but people that are interested in the subject would ask. So I think that's like, it is a great step and it's very personal. And like, I really enjoy doing these. It's really good. And I said, my only focus is that I interview people I'm interested in and like enjoy talking to. Like that's the only criteria, although we're trying to come up with like a theme that's really right now is the only requirement. But I would like almost like to get more of your advice. Like, how do you scale that though? I think one of the challenges I've had is that there's kind of like me and Kingsley are kind of the two co-founders, and we tend to be the funnel point, and whether if it's a student looking for a job in tech or just looking to, there's been a few people that moved to Newfoundland, like, hey, how can I meet some people here? But like I become that funnel point, and I do, being a full-time like
Yeah, yeah.
and employee and stuff, like it is challenging to scale that. And I would love, like, how do we come up with, like, we've talked about a mentor matching program, or like, there's a program called like 10,000 cups of coffee where
Yeah.
you can match people. And I would love to have some kind of, we've got this database to create a matching system, or some way to facilitate that. I don't know if you have any ideas how to do that.
Yeah, like the exact mechanics I've not thought enough about, but it is about like the surrogates, right? It's like you need, okay, someone wants to ask about moving from Newfoundland to Texas. Like, okay, let's hook them up with Josh for half an hour. And of course, I'd be happy to do that, Greg. But in general, like I think you need a way to kind of, it's not just by region, right? It's by the topic of the conversation, and then while you can't do it all and funnel that, you can't be a receptionist taking all the calls, but a way to kind of bucket the questions or the uncertainty that people have and want to talk about into, one surrogate of global NL, right? And to just have a conversation. Because if you really think about it, if you have 50 people, say, that were willing to give up an hour a week to talk about their time, that's a lot of talking to prospective people that want to hear it. And the other thing too is like what I found interesting in my line of work is I often tell supervisors and managers, or be it teachers or coordinators at the co-op office, is like, look, pull a group of 4 people if you think you got 4 people interested in tech, like pull 4 people in a room and we'll do a little conference call with 4 people. It's still very personal. People feel quite comfortable asking questions, and it's still kind of below that 5-person threshold where you start to allow people to zone out, right? And so you can start to build little groups. So I found that effective.
No, I think it's a really good idea. That's probably like a next step, or like we're actually considering like hiring like a full-time person to probably be based in Newfoundland and and they could probably play that role, at least come up with it. Cause you need to, like, even if you had say 10 or 15, kind of mentors or whatever, like it does take work to funnel people in, funnel people out, connect people and stuff. But I think if we hire someone either full-time or part-time, that could be like one of their primary roles, to be that conduit or that connector.
Yeah. I think the end has to be a conversation, whether it's email or phone, or preferably on the phone, but the end of the connection has to be a back and forth of some kind.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice. I think I've asked this question to, it's kind of my last main question. It's if you could put a billboard. I've kind of narrowed it down to outside St. John's Airport, so it can be a message to anyone coming or going from Newfoundland. If kind of sending a message to anyone that's coming or going, what, I don't know if I didn't give you much prep to think about this, but what message would you put on that billboard, and maybe what would it say?
I knew it was coming. I listened to the podcast, Greg. I knew it was coming. Now, I think it's actually funny because I think it's something I really have been feeling, but really crystallized listening to some of the podcasts. I would say shorten your planning time frame, right? Shorten how far out in the world you're looking, because I think you need to think about what's my life right now, what's important to me right now. Okay, let's get something that makes that better. And for us, I mean, here's a really simple analogy that I like to kind of use about that topic is Newfoundland is absolutely beautiful, right? You swoop in on a drone video of the Narrows, and you see all these big hills and downtown and townhouses, and wow, Prescott Street is so beautiful, the little painted row houses. We came down here, we got a 3-year-old kid, and he learned to ride a bike, okay, because Houston is completely flat. It's sunny basically year round. There's no wind, and the sidewalks are all set back from the road. I'm not sure he could learn to ride a bike if I lived on Gower Street, like, but how do you even bike around? How do you go to the park when there's a 60-degree incline in front of you, And so it's just little things, like not looking at the big picture, because big picture, I'm like, Newfoundland is amazing. It's my home. It's my passion. It's my family. It's beautiful. The outside, the hiking. But when I actually zoom in and stop talking about life and start talking about the next 2-3 years, the beauty and rolling hills of St. John's is actually not that important to me. I spend most of my time either at work, at home, or within like 1,000 feet of my house. And so, and I love to be outside, and the kids love to be outside. So that's what's important to me. That's why I think Houston's been good. And had I continued, I debated this for 9 years. Had I thought always long-term and always, where do I want to be in the end? I think I never ever would have left.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's all like, I think it always depends on the stage you are in life too. And there's just people are different. People's times in their lives are different, where they want to be and what they want to do. And I do think spending some portion of time outside the province gives you a clear perspective, right? It gives you an idea what it's like to live somewhere else. And it does give you a clear perspective on the province in general, and the positive and negative aspects of it. And I mean, when I think back of it, the not the only thing, but the primary thing I miss is my family. It's like my 2 sisters and all their kids, and my parents are there, and we stay quite close to them. And I'm grateful to live in a technology age where you can FaceTime every day, and we do that right now, and I'm very grateful for that. But I don't really miss all those. I mean, I do miss being able to run up Signal Hill on a daily basis, but I miss the people, right? If I could take them with me, I don't know if I'd miss much else, Like there are aspects of it, but it's mostly the people that you miss. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's me, is like, I think shortening the time frame. And I think, like, we had done the opposite of that, right? I mean, we graduated, and eventually built, we built a house with a contractor that was, our forever home, right? Yeah. That was where we were going to live forever. That was the plan. And to even say that out loud now seems so silly. If I got sent back to Newfoundland tomorrow, of course I'd be happy with that. But I think I'd be thinking about, well, where do we want to live? What makes sense for the next like 3 to 5 years? Like, if you can buy and sell a house, you can buy and sell a car. It's okay. And change is okay. And you don't have to do everything with a 30-year outlook.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I remember when I was starting my career, like the first 5 or 6 years, like I had my whole career planned out, like all the jobs I was going to do, where I was, going to live notionally, and like the end job I wanted, And now that has just gotten blown up, those, and in most ways it's like better, or more aligned with what I wanted to do. But at the time I was like, no, I want to do this, 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 and this. And you planned out 20 or 30 years, and even some of the houses you wanted to live in and all this kind of stuff. And you just realize how silly, and how that's kind of an illusion where you think you can plan that far ahead, There was something I was going to add to that. I can't remember.
Well, man, like, I think about it even with my, many people in Newfoundland, no one in the family ever leaves. And when they leave, it's a tragedy, and I was that guy who'd send a message to my friend living away, like, hey man, any trips home? I can't believe you're not, coming home for this. And, or like, I'm so sorry that you haven't been able to find work back here. Are you still looking for work in Newfoundland? And asking these questions, and you start to realize, like, maybe that person, will come back someday, but maybe they're completely content with their lot in life right now. And, just living there, you don't have that perspective. And so it's been great for me. Lots of things I miss, of course, the people, but, you're so right that it just gives you a little bit of a broader aperture. You look at it from, 3,000, 5,000 miles away, it starts to look, just different, not worse, not better, just different.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think what I was going to touch on was that the company I work for now didn't exist when I finished engineering school, right? And it's like, so like when I think about like why didn't I maybe work for a company like that, it's like, well, it didn't exist. So like, what could I do in 10 years? Or I hope I work for maybe 30 more years or something like that. and like what's going to exist in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, And I think it goes back to being more adaptive. I think it's not just for students, but you kind of hear this talk about, people having to make career changes, like more and more in this kind of modern changing economy and stuff. And I think we're all going to be forced to be more adaptive and things like that as the economy and kind of different industries evolve and things like that. But to kind of embrace that and say, like, to be open to those ideas. And, someone said that it's not a career ladder, it's more of a jungle gym. And I've tried to embrace that in the last couple of years more than I did before.
It is, but it's just like it requires such a shift in for people. I mean, I would say, like, I would call us like the transition generation from like, you get married, you have kids, you build your house, you pay down your mortgage, you retire with the company, get your pension, hopefully, right? To like now, I mean, the person, graduating university next year, their view of it's probably very different, right? From many of the societal norms to just general career planning, like you say, jumping around. And so for me, and people like me who've been in that mindset for a long time, to many respects, I still am. Everything from financial planning to the way you live and your lifestyle and your commitments that you make. If you're going to be more adaptive and be more open to change, you have to act differently and think of things differently. You don't think of houses as 25, 30-year investments if your time frame of moving around is 2 to 3 years. And so I think just those things are just, I'm not sure anyone needs to be coached on that besides myself, but it's, like people coming up now. But that's a major shift in how people live their lives, right?
But it can't, like, I find it takes the pressure off, right? It's like, you don't need to plan for like 30 years from now. I mean, you need to save some money for retirement to make sure, you're set up for those things. But besides that, just like thinking that far in the future is kind of a waste of energy, But when you're starting off, it's very tempting to spend a lot of time fantasizing or thinking about those things. But a lot of times the best part and the worst parts just kind of don't come true. Predicting the future seems almost impossible.
Yeah, I always tell whenever I have these one-on-ones with our young employees, basically I tell them every time there's 2 questions to ask your boss, right? And ask yourself is, what do you think would be good for me next? And when is next, right? And if you really think about it as simply as that actually draws out a lot of insight, right? And you just stop looking way down the track at something that, what is the state of our industries in 20 years? I don't even know.
No, that's true. All right. I was going to suggest wrapping things up. Do you have any other comments or any other topics you want to touch on before we clue things up?
No, Greg, really, really happy to be on. It was an honor to be a guest on the podcast. A lot of more influential and successful folks before me, but I really am happy to be on and do it, and happy to connect with anyone that you want to send my way about relocation or anything you think that I might weigh in on. And on top of that, I just love the podcast and I love what you guys are doing. So I'm super happy.
Sweet. All right. Thanks for the support, continued feedback. And we'll look forward. We'll share this when it goes live in the next couple of weeks. Thanks, Josh. I want to thank you for listening to this week's episode of Uncharted Waters, the podcast brought to you by Global NL. A special thank you to my co-host Jeremy Andrews, editor Hi Nim, and producer Frank Smythe. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to sharing more stories about Newfoundlanders and Labradorians doing interesting and amazing things around the world.